record. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. I realize I don't have a light on. It's going to get dark on me here in a minute, but that's all right because we'll be looking at Mallory's work and not at me. I am going to read an introduction to WEED, and I'm going to read a land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to introduce Mallory, and then we'll be hearing about her work for the rest of the presentation. We are recording, and at the end of Mallory's presentation, we'll briefly stop the recording and start a second one. So for the question and answers at the end, there'll be a second recording. It helps us keep things organized on our website. So with that, I'm going to read our introduction and our land acknowledgement. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this art and science presentation. This is art and science number 2, communicating science to Native communities through Native created art, featuring the work of artist and scientist Mallery Quetawki. I'm Anna McGarrigan. I'm WEED's staff person. I joined WEED last year. I love being part of this community. I could chat with all of you all evening about what everybody does. It's been thrilling for me to be a part of this community. I'm a scientist and a science communicator, and I'm also an art student. And the more I explore how art and science come together in my own life, the more people I'm finding like Mallory who are doing the same. November is Native American Heritage Month, and I'm honored to have Mallory, who's a member of the Zuni Pueblo community, presenting her work with us tonight. I'm going to give a brief introduction to WEED and read a land acknowledgement and cover a few Zoom housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce Mallory and hand things over to her. Women Eco Artists Dialogue, which was founded in 1996, is a volunteer-run collective of female-identified visual artists, writers, curators, art historians, researchers, scientists, and others interested in highlighting the intersections of art and ecological issues. If you're new to WEED, you can learn more about our work and all of our artists, as well as view recordings of all of our presentations at weedartists.org. I will now read our land acknowledgement, and feel free to add your own location and land acknowledgement to the chat if you'd like. WEED's office sits on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County, near one of the largest shell mounds in the Bay Area. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who are campaigning to become federally recognized, the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, who are researching, revitalizing, and preserving Ramaytush Ohlone history and culture, and the Confederated Villages of Lichun and Sogorea Land Trust, who are working to return Native land back to Indigenous stewardship. And for Zoom housekeeping items, please keep your audio muted, and a host may mute you if there's extra noise. We're recording this presentation, and we'll stop the initial recording and start a second one for the questions at the end of the presentation. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll address them during the question and answer portion. And now, I'm happy to introduce Mallery Quetawki. I first learned about Mallory and her work in a publication by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. After a quick Google search turned up some of her beautiful artwork, I immediately invited her to speak in our art and science series and was thrilled when she accepted. Mallory was the first artist in residence of the Community Environmental Health Program, or CEHP, in 2016, where she worked to tailor the program's scientific research communications to be more culturally inclusive and relatable. She has since created acrylic paintings and digital artwork to portray the complexities of biochemical pathways and other health-related information through an Indigenous lens. And this lens is a product of Mallory's Pueblo upbringing, her college science education, and the collaborations between keepers of Indigenous knowledge and the researchers involved in a wide range of CEHP projects. The goals for the Artist in Residence program are to translate science, bridge bidirectional communication, and create an inclusive environment so that collaborating Indigenous communities are informed and represented throughout the process from research to healthcare. Mallory, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to now turn things over to you. Welcome.
Awesome. Good evening. How is everyone? Thank you for having me. This is really awesome that there's a cohort of individuals who have a like-minded goal in mind to communicate science, the arts. It's been a difficult journey in so many ways, but one of which was like I felt so alone a lot of the times. I would go to either health and art conferences, eco art conferences, and it a lot of it just did not fit the work that I do. Folks thought I was doing art therapy, and although I do partake, I am not a licensed art therapist, and I just include the many vast amounts of artistic styles our communities have here in the Southwest, and find these our indigenous ways of knowing, indigenous sensibilities that we've grown up with and that we've passed down from generation to generation, and link them up with science and healthcare concepts. And so it's been quite a journey, and I really appreciate when folks like you all invite me to speak, because I feel that we, as Indigenous people, we need a seat at the table when it comes to research and different things with the environment and ecology studies that are out there, because who better to help inform science than the people that have been here since time immemorial. There's been a lot of traditions that we've passed down that are mere observations of the world's history, the world's ecological history, the world's changing times, the earth's, the planet's, seasons and different changes that it has gone through have become really ingrained in our culture and our identity. So I really like to share that through my art. And I will not keep you all waiting. I will go ahead and share my screen so that you can view with me the art that I create. So as mentioned, I'm part of the Community Environmental Health Program as the Communication and Outreach Specialist for the University of New Mexico College of Pharmacy. We have so many programs under this umbrella. The Native EH Equity, which is the P50 Center, the Metals, which is a Superfund Center, P42, and the Navajo Birth Cohort Study, which is a nationwide environmental influences on child health outcome study, are all underneath this umbrella, are the major ones, but I also work with others here on campus very closely. But let's go ahead and get into how art has, become part of the work that we do. I have to go ahead and mention here today, I am presenting from Albuquerque, New Mexico, although my original homelands are in Zuni, Pueblo. Albuquerque is the original homelands of the Sandia Pueblo, who are Tiwa speakers of one of the 19 Pueblos in New Mexico, along with Navajo Nation and Apache Nations, which make up the 22 tribes of New Mexico. So here in New Mexico, we do have a legacy of uranium mining. Not too far from Albuquerque, about 2 hours west of here, we have one of the largest uranium belts in the country. It's around the Grants District area, and it goes into different indigenous communities. And so back during the Cold War, we had a lot of mining of uranium in this region, and primarily took place on tribal land, especially the Navajo Nation. Right now, about half of the about 600 abandoned uranium mines are just on Navajo Nation alone. And I want to say maybe 3/4 of those are unmarked. They are still discovering them to this day. Open vents, different chutes that have been left abandoned are, a lot of the Navajo people who are out herding and grazing their sheep and cattle come across them. Children playing out in, the hills have come across them. So there's a lot of unmarked mines scattered along the Navajo Nation, which encompasses the four corners of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. We partner with Navajo Nation at CHP, as well as the Laguna Pueblo. Laguna Pueblo is about 30 minutes outside of Albuquerque, and they used to have, well, they do have an open pit uranium mine, which used to be the largest of the world of open pit mines until one in Africa sprang up. But they have their villages, one village of which, Powati, sits right in the center of one of the larger mines and a smaller mine. So we partner with them to do different ecological studies on their land. We also partner with Cheyenne River Sioux, as well as the Crow in Montana. So we work with a lot of indigenous communities, and I really appreciate the people that I work with and work for. Our director has, paved the way in ensuring that the indigenous peoples have this seat at the table, that they're helping us direct the science and participating in community-based research and citizen science methods. And it's just been really wonderful seeing that and getting our people involved in the science of their lands and the conditions in which they are residing in. And we continually go into our communities, do report backs, to collect specimens. And there was a time in about 2016, right before I joined the team, that they went to one of these events out in Blue Gap Tachi, Arizona. They had a mutton roast with folks from Mongolia that were also visiting. And after the event, they wanted to ask, what do you feel about the science being done on your lands and about the uranium mines? And the people themselves said that, we appreciate the science, we appreciate the research, where, you're helping us gain insight into how we can, take this information and take it to our tribal government and, to the US government to start remediation and cleanup efforts. However, we don't really understand the science. You're showing us these pictures, you're showing us these graphs, these numbers, going right over our heads. We are not scientists. We did not go to college as you all did. You need to meet us in the middle. How do you teach us some of this so that we can take this information ourselves and pass it where it needs to go? And they recommended utilizing art and visual aids to help, teach some of the science that they were presenting. And this discussion led our director into thinking, how do we do that? How does this even work? And she just so happened to be at a meeting not too far from the Blue Gap Tachi area. She had a meeting at the Zuni IHS hospital in Zuni, Pueblo, where I have a series of 12 pastel and ink paintings on the walls of the hall there at the clinic. They're all anatomical pictures of different parts of the body, from organ systems all the way to the cellular level. And all of them are ornate with, design with all the Zuni pottery patterns and indigenous pictures and things like that. And she, her light bulb went on there, and she said, I have to find this person because I think she can do what, the community was asking for. So it was then in 2017 that I joined the team to become the first artist in residence with the program. And just to put it out there, why indigenous people, there are barriers and there are communication gaps between researchers and, let's say, healthcare providers, outside individuals who come onto the reservation for any kind of business. There are, just within New Mexico, I mentioned there are 22 tribes, and of those 22 tribes, there are 7 different languages spoken, and only one of those languages, 2 of those languages are written. So a lot of the indigenous languages do not have words for modern scientific and modern medical terminologies. So therefore, it is really hard to convey a lot of this information from research to back to the people to report back, because there's still, you know, a lot of our elders that are living on the reservation are still more, you know, able to understand their traditional language versus English. And when they do have translators there, the translators are also having a difficult time translating, you know, things like radionucleotides and you know, uranium decay into their language. So we have to be considerate of that when we are trying to communicate the work that we do. There's very, very many other things we have to take into consideration. There's historical traumas that Indigenous people have faced and are still facing today, and the fear behind, you know, just hearing research, hearing, you know, genetic research or scientific studies on the people or the person or the land is already you know, a pushback from the community, because, you know, the mistrust that we have had with you know, the government, and also, you know, some institutions that have done studies without permission or without, you know, correct forms of consent. Just like the Havasupai incident in Arizona, where ASU collected biological samples for diabetes studies. However, very few years later, a student from Havasupai went to a seminar talking about, oh, this is what we found from these samples. And she went, and they did not even mention diabetes studies. They were studying alcoholism. They were studying the Bering Strait theory. They were studying psychological behaviors using Havasupai genetic samples. And so that is where, you know, a lot of our people have began to distrust genetic research. And we're, you know, as scientists, we're going to have to rebuild that trust, and it takes a lot of effort. And we have to be cognizant of the different cultural protocols that these communities have. And not every community is universal. Every community has their own ways of knowing, have their own cultural practices, their own ceremonies, their own stories. And so we have to really tailor this information that we want to give back to the community. And so, as mentioned before, my main goals as the artist in residence is to translate the science, bridge the bidirectional communication, and create an inclusive environment for the Native communities we work with. And this was the very first painting I created for them right here. It's called the zinc binding protein. And, you know, it's who knows, like, not everybody knows about what the zinc binding protein is. And so it's a really tall order for them to tell me we need to let them know what this protein is, because we're going to be doing a study called Thinking Zinc. And I said, okay, so what, you know, what is the purpose of the study? My how I work is, you know, I do know a good amount of science, but not enough to conceptualize everything on the spot. So I had to really crack open the textbooks again and sit in on seminars and sit around, you know, all the, you know, really rigid scientific talks and lectures about what it is, you know, I'll be creating for the communities. And this study that we're doing in our Superfund Center is called Thinking Zinc, and it is a study that supplements over-the-counter zinc tablets to communities living in and around abandoned uranium mines, because it is seen in lab studies that zinc can actually be absorbed in these binding proteins that, you know, upkeep our immune system and whatnot within our bodies. And these zinc finger proteins actually also bind heavy metals like arsenic and uranium and vanadium. And so they kind of compete for these spaces. And so when zinc is introduced, zinc's going to have the more affinity to these protein places. So we're hoping that having supplemental zinc will displace the other heavy metals that could be present in the environment. So this was one of the ways I portrayed that. I literally painted the the protein going after and binding to the good metal, which I call zinc, is the good metal here. And I use the jewelry pieces from that you'll recognize from here in the Southwest, the squash blossom pins, the petite point cluster turquoise jewelry you'll see here in the Southwest that we all adore and we wear proudly. And that shows that when you bind that particular good metal, your protein looks healthy. But when you bind one of the ugly green ones, then your protein starts to crumble and crack. So that's kind of how I wanted to portray why we want to utilize zinc as a supplement. And so just my steps into translating through this native lens that I talk about. The native lens is just covers everything in our different cultures, primarily the idea of traditional ecological knowledge, which is this indigenous worldview that has only, we really can only explain that is that deep participation with the environment that, Native peoples have lived off the land for so many years. And I had mentioned before that, all our ceremonies and all our belief systems and our culture has really come from the earth itself and all the changes and the different events that have happened in the earth's history, ecological history has been really deeply ingrained in our cultures and our ways of thinking. And so this type of knowledge I like to utilize because we do, these environmental studies, that there's already knowledges out there that can inform the science that we do here at UNM. So this painting here was actually commissioned by MIT. Their biological engineering department wanted a painting that visualized what happens in the gut microbiome and all the different microbes that work together to create, a good, healthy, functioning gut. And so, although the tribes on the East Coast are very different from the tribes here in the Southwest, I still had to take, something that could be universal. And one thing that is universal, I think, in a lot of our tribal communities is beadwork and the arts and the patterns that we all have that mean something. And so this painting was utilizing the quill work and the beadwork of the Algonquin-speaking nations, the Abenaki tribes of the East Coast. There's the Passamaquoddy, the Micmac, Penobscot tribes that reside in the area that are being understudied by MIT Superfund Center. So I use beadwork to portray what happens when probiotics and prebiotics come together in the gut to, help break down food and pass on nutrients. And, the scientists there can further talk about what else goes on, but the intriguing part is how the process of beadwork can be seen as, when you take the one little bead, you put the other beads together to create patterns along the way, and then you come to a full finished piece, and that's what the whole gut represents here. So yeah, TEK, as I mentioned, just all these knowledge systems that help us sustain our ways, the relationship we have to the plants, animals, the cycles of the season, the land, everything from farming to agriculture. Our agricultural ways have been, passed down through observations with nature. And so the biggest thing that we've had to address here was to make sure that the information that we're sending out is recognizable and relatable. And we've had, pictures from textbooks or whatnot coming in, and our scientists, before I joined, our scientists were just, picking pictures from the internet or cutting and pasting different pictures to represent an ecosystem that looked nothing like this desert arid Southwest New Mexico. We had people posting the savannas, the saguaro cactus desert landscape, whereas we don't really see that around here. We have prickly pears, we have really red mace. Because our land is this really red orange color, like we need to include these colors and these images, recognizable things in our in our communication efforts. So this is just a conceptual model that I created to help them relay the way that our program is situated in the communities that we work with. And the main 4 communities we work with in our Superfund Center is Laguna Pueblo and 3 Navajo Nation chapters. There's Cameron, Blue Gap Tachi, and the Redwater Pond Road. So I also ensure that I'm including other ways of knowing in our communication. So what is a holistic worldview? Indigenous people, not every tribe, but if I'm speaking only on behalf of here in the Southwest, that a lot of our tribes do not have this individualistic approach to life. Everything is done in community, is done together, whether it's your entire village, your entire nation, your family, your band, your tribe, everything is done together. Harvest is collected together. The communities celebrate together, communities mourn together. And so not one individual sees just themselves when we approach folks for things like biological sampling. They want this consensus from their community as well, and that when a piece of them leaves, they're put out into the world, and they stay out in the world till they return to the earth, and it needs to go back with them. So we have a lot of cultural protocols we need to recognize when we're doing sampling. And I want to reiterate and say again that not all our systems, belief systems, and spiritual ways are universal. We are all very different. We all do believe if the land is sick, we are sick. We are directly connected to this environment. And so this painting here that I created was to pay homage to the indigenous scientists who have joined this, this fight to find ways to challenge and create ways to remediate damage that has been done, to find ways to, combat the effects of climate change, and, to also combat, the different kinds of environmental hazards that have occurred. And I mentioned before too, earlier before we started to talk, that it's very pertinent that indigenous people have a seat at the table during any kind of policy making, litigations about the land that we live on, because who better to tell you, how this part of the, land works than the people who've been here for time immemorial. This painting signifies that. It shows, that ancestral ties to land, water, and sky, and all our petroglyphs in the background being merged into circuit boards. And that's because we're bringing our indigenous knowledge systems into this modern world to try to work together, to try to create better avenues for the land to heal. And the indigenous person in front is dressed in traditional Crow woman clothing and fanning sage into the ailing land, praying with the language and praying to these ancestor beings to help us, guide us to help protect the land. So this is just kind of like a dedication piece to those that have, taken on that challenge to get higher degrees. I am so proud of every postdoc and PhD that I work with who is indigenous, who were born and raised on the lands that they're now working with. So another, I had mentioned before, not every culture is universal. There are 19 pueblos in New Mexico, and all 19 of us are very different. I'm from Zuni Pueblo. We speak the Zuni language, and Zuni is a language isolate. None of the other 19 pueblos speak that language. We are also very geographically isolated, so hence why our language is very different. So when I work with other pueblos, I really have to go and ask cultural knowledge holders from these particular communities to make sure that the work that I'm producing is not offensive, or it's not, stepping over any boundaries for against cultural protocols. within their communities, and to make sure that I'm honoring any taboos that might exist. And so for Laguna Pueblo, I created this painting, and I would have really liked to put this really, slimy, bloody lung on the painting to show what happens when, air particulates travel into the lungs, and it affects the different tissues of the lungs, especially uranium and other heavy metals that could be in the dust out near where the Jack Pile mine exists. And however, respecting that idea of not having such literal gross anatomy put on display for this community, I decided to kind of find something else, find something just as sacred as, our body parts and our organs, by using pottery designs. And this is where I found out that pottery designs for the Pueblo community specifically, any Pueblo community, is probably the most safest way to conceptualize certain topics and to represent things for that the community can understand, because all these patterns also mean something, and we put so much meaning and definitions into even just the color and the way it's put and where it's sitting, and all the different juxtapositions of design have meaning in our community. So for Laguna Pueblo, this is what I created to portray air particulates traveling into and breaching, the lung barrier, the and to also talk about phytoremediation, which we already knew exists. So using the floral patterns on the bottom along the water side to show that we're trying to use certain plants to filter the water from uranium and other metals that could be present. And just using the color schemes that we see, you can see the Jack Pile mine in the back that has that more yellow tinge to it, and the clay deposits that have been put on top to try to remediate some of this area. And you can see that this just painting is really more conceptual than anything, and it's I've gotten really good feedback for it from the particular community. Another way that I like to show how some knowledge systems can only be understood by Indigenous people, but however can also be used to help relay information from non-Native people, was by creating these paintings that describe the immune system. So when we're working with heavy metals, we also know that in the other studies, uranium exposure has shown possibilities of immune dysfunction and dysregulation. And so we wanted to ensure that, the people knew what the immune system was and how it works and what autoimmunity is. So I created this painting on top to kind of start that conversation. The little animals you see in the turquoise circles are the buffalo, the war pony, and the bear. And those are all animal totems of strength. They're spirit animals that we know of, that we seek to for guidance, for protection, and for healing. And the color turquoise in Pueblo and in Navajo communities is a color for protection. The stone itself, it's why we wear it on our bodies all the time. The arrowhead is a protective symbol. We all wear arrowheads in the Southwest for protection. And to be inclusive of the other communities I work with up north in the Plains area, the Cheyenne River Sioux and the Crow, I included the medicine wheel and the sweat lodge to also show the sweat lodge as a protective thing, because it is a cleansing, spiritual cleansing as well. It's protective for the people. I used the Navajo wedding basket with the medicine wheel to portray that one thing we really want to protect and keep sacred, and that represents the cell. And the arrowheads, turquoise, the animals represent, like the B cells, T cells, macrophages that protect the cell inside of our bodies from invaders like bacteria and viruses. And so I made sure that I was consistent. And so for the autoimmunity painting, I show all those animal totems fighting one another, because that's what happens in an autoimmune reaction. Our bodies create this effect where everything goes haywire and starts attacking itself. So this was one of the, you know, ways I could, help the people conceptualize things that we believe in our culture that you cannot see necessarily. Also, with something you cannot see happening live within your body, which is, the way our immune system is protecting us. So those are some of the ways that I've been able to create artwork for the communities. My favorite way, though, is to make sure that I'm creating something that can be used bi-directionally or multi-directionally form of communication. This painting up at top is one of my most favorite to talk about, because I'm not only translating scientific concepts to Native communities, but I also want to ensure that researchers and other non-Native, providers or caregivers understand why it is we hold this land so sacred, and why we, have these boundaries when it comes to genetic research and even just research on our lands and mining, why we're stewards of this land. It is because we believe we are always forever connected to the land, because here in the Southwest, this is true with both Pueblo and Navajo Nation communities, that when a baby is born, when their umbilical cord dries up, we don't take it and just, slap it into a scrapbook or frame it and put it on the wall to embarrass our children for years to come. We actually return the umbilical cord to the earth. And it is done through ceremonies. It is done differently for each community. It's also done differently for each gender. In Zuni Pueblo, we bury the dried umbilical cord of our daughters near home or inside the house in the floorboard, or directly under the house, because we want them to be nurturing and to be a caregiver and to have the ability to maintain, our homes, keep them warm, keep everyone fed, and be that leader of your home. And then we also, for the boys, we take the umbilical cord to the forest, or to the forest, so that they're good hunters and they're avid, where they have that agility like the deer. And or we take them to the farmlands, to the fields, so that they're good farmers and they become green thumbs, and that they're able to nurture the land as well. So we do it through ceremony. So sometimes people might think, outside scientists, investigators might wonder why we're real standoffish when they want to go study that pile of dirt or that pile of rocks over to the corner that maybe looks so insignificant to them, but to us, that might have been a location for one of us to take our child's umbilical cord, or, a placenta that we may have, buried. And so it's really sacred to us. Every part of the land must be kept protected. We're stewards of this land. We don't hold dominion over it. However, we are part of it. That is why that, umbilical connection, that we too are nurtured from this land. So we must nurture back. One of the paintings that is one of my most popular ones is actually a part of the traveling exhibit called Exposure, Native Political Art and Ecology. I think it is hosted by the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts of the Santa Fe IIA, Indigenous Arts Institute in Santa Fe. And this one also talks about the stories of how our people have prophesied that, there was going to be a time that the land under Chaco Canyon area, if it were to be disturbed, there could be, bad consequences. There would be sicknesses, illnesses, and war. So that is why it is said our people had to vacate the area in the region, because they didn't want to disturb what was under the ground. And Chaco Canyon is one of the areas that sits on the uranium mine belt. There is oil nearby. There's been a lot of fracking. We recently won the case to expand the land amount and the years for its protection, Chaco Canyon. But it is a very sacred place to Pueblo peoples here in New Mexico. This is just a way that I like to also share, cultural awareness of communities that we work with. And we've been trying to figure out ways to put this within the hands of young learners, young researchers, early investigators. And sometimes I ask myself, where would this fit in the curriculum? We have a lot of eager undergrads, and I love it. I love seeing their eager faces when they get involved in science. And then next thing you know, I'm talking to a PhD who's just trying to, blow off, a concern by a community member saying, it might be encroaching our cultural belief systems. And it's like, okay, well, where did that division happen? Where did this, investigator forget the humanity behind the science? And so I want to figure out a way that we put that humanity back in the sciences. And so I not only work with, researchers that only do, ecological studies, environmental studies, but I work with, folks from the Cancer Center, where we're doing genomic sequencing research directly on individual cancer patients. And I work with the local hospitals and clinics to also convey health messaging. I mean, COVID-19 was like the biggest time that I think a lot of us artists ever had to hone our skills and answer the call to help our people see and understand why it was important to prevent and to vaccinate and just spread awareness of COVID-19, because it was during that time that people actually finally told me why they weren't too keen on, health messaging or PSAs from the hospital or CDC, was because during the pandemic, the CDC released this. I thought they were neat. They were pretty neat infographics that we have posted all over the reservations. It went to all the clinics and hospitals, how to prevent, wash hands, cover your face, everything. But my specific community was not adhering to it. And I'm over here working in the public health, like, why are you not listening? This is why we're sick. And I just had to ask, like, why aren't you guys listening to the PSAs? There's posters everywhere. And they said, what posters? I said, right there, they're at the store, they're at the post office. And they're like, oh, those things? They don't have anything to do with us. They're like stick figures. They who knows what kind of people those are? I don't think they're talking about us. It's like, okay. Therefore, I had to go back and take a lot of the infographics that came from CDC and indigenize them, make them look recognizable, representative of these communities. And then they understood why it was important. And we had to connect it to the culture, connect it to the people, because unfortunately, Indigenous people have been at the very, sad end of health equity and just even access to health services, that they don't feel that they're a part of any picture, any conversation when it comes to public health and to research and to science. So this is why I do the work that I do. I'm trying to create this space to invite Native peoples to participate in our science, to ask us questions, to become part of the team. We have such a diverse team that we work with. I mean, I'm an artist, I am trained in science, but it is really neat to see on the lineup of all the principal investigators and researchers, all the statisticians, the data people, GIS people. You see my name and it says artist. So it's really neat. And then we also have community liaisons we work with that help us convey these messages that are culturally respectful and correct for these communities. So we make sure that our communities are part of creating the messaging as well as directing the science. I mean, I can say so many instances where, researchers come in, there's, uranium mines nearby. They do research on something like the salt cedar, which is very invasive. It's not native to the land. They want to see how much uranium is in that, and the people are like, why? We don't really use those. Or, it's not that important to us. Can you check the wild mint? Can you check the wild tea, the wild celeries that we still harvest and that we can show you where they grow? We can show you when we harvest and show you, how we prepare it to see if these too might be collecting uranium or other heavy metals. And like that just help us lead that science because I mean, we are trying to find ways to remediate the wrongdoings that have happened in the past, and we are building trust through all these little steps, and it is very well worth it. It does take a lot of time to work in Indigenous communities. You have to have a lot of sit-down learning sessions, talking circles. You work with tribal governments, you work with community leaders who are separate from the tribal government. Um, we have to work with both spiritual and religious folks from these communities, and then the people that live in and around the areas that you're going to be researching. So it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of effort. And it could scare off researchers. And I'm very proud that the University of New Mexico, amongst others, have not backed off and have continued to work with Indigenous communities to make sure that, this science is led by them and that the data stays with them. There's a big happening going on right now on data sovereignty. And that is a big thing for us as Indigenous communities because we can have ownership of the data collected. And yeah, and so that's my next steps is to train young undergrads along with established PIs how to work with an artist and how to work with a cultural knowledge holder on a specific science project together and to be able to share it together thereafter with their community. And the paint, little digital art drawing on the bottom with the elders. I really, when I do my work, my main thing is every time I hear a concept, like right now, we're really going into, microplastics and PFAs, and I have to think about all the information coming at me, and I have to say, well, how do I tell this to my grandparents? How do I tell this to my 12 and 13-year-old? And then I sit down with a health literacy expert, um, a lay language expert, and we work together. I do not work alone. I work in this giant team of people, and everyone has a voice in my work as well. And we create together, and so that everyone is always on the same page, and that we are building health equity and building capacity in the communities that we're working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. If we were like all in the same room, I'd be standing up and that was amazing. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording and I'm gonna start it again, and then I'm gonna open the floor for some questions. Let me make sure I don't do this
Absolutely.
wrong.